All right, so welcome back. We're going to move on to Chapter 12, which introduces three specific forms that have been grouped together. These are frequently presented as fallacies, but with the exception of golden mean, doesn't have to be a fallacy. And these are slippery slope, dilemma, and the golden mean argument. Now we start off here with the slippery slope. The slippery slope argument is a very common one, and it's also a lot of fun, because it begins with some major issue or some point, and it builds through a chain of reasoning until the final line reveals to us that our failure to prevent the first issue is going to lead to a major catastrophe, maybe even to the breakdown of civilization or the end of the world as we know it. All right, so it always goes to some ridiculous extreme. The slippery slope, as it says here, is a variety of the false cause fallacy, and it occurs when the conclusion of an argument rests on an alleged chain reaction without sufficient reason. So you remember way back when we talked about the idea of a causal argument. Causal argument's an inductive claim that says that B occurs because of A. So I gave you the example of releasing the pen and having it fall. The pen falling was caused by my release of the pen. Well, that's a perfectly legitimate claim. But it becomes a fallacy when there's no reason to believe that A caused B, but rather that the causal link there is merely because B followed A. Right? So if I release the pen and the pen falls, that's a causal link, and that makes perfect sense. But if I release the pen and then somebody trips on a banana peel, we shouldn't imagine that the one caused the other. It's merely a coincidence that one event happened after the other. So a slippery slope argument is similar to that. There's a whole chain of causes that has to be linked together and logically build towards the end result. If the causal arguments making up the slippery slope or the causal chain is legitimate, then the argument is legitimate. But the argument is only as strong as its weakest link. So if a false cause appears anywhere in the argument, then it commits the slippery slope fallacy. So let's take a look at this example I have on the screen here for you. It says steps should be taken to outlaw pornography because its sale will lead to an increase in sex-related crimes, which will lead to crimes of all sorts, eventually leading to the collapse of society. So we start off with this simple request. We want to outlaw pornography. But if you follow that chain, by the time we get to the end of it, if we don't take this one simple step of outlawing pornography, it's going to be the collapse of our entire civilization. Okay, this is the idea of a slippery slope. But you'll notice that one thing leads to another. Step one, we need to outlaw pornography. Why? Because if we don't, it's going to lead to an increase in sex-related crimes. Well, if we have an increase in sex-related crimes, then that's going to lead to other sorts of crimes. And if we have an increase in those other sorts of crimes, then we're going to end up destroying our society. Now, if you analyze those links, you find the fault in this. Outlawing pornography, is that going to lead to an increase in sex-related crimes? Not necessarily. It might not. Let's give it the benefit of the doubt for that one. But would an increase in sex-related crimes necessarily lead to an increase in other crimes? For example, if we have an increase in rape, is that necessarily going to lead to an increase in bank robberies? It doesn't make sense. And so at that point, the link, the chain is broken, which means that what we have here is a fallacy, the slippery slope fallacy. All right, so again, if the links all match up, if they all make sense logically, then you have a legitimate slippery slope. But if not, then you also have, then you have a fallacy. Here's another example, maybe a little bit less extreme. Professor Fallon has asked us to purchase a coffee maker for her office. But we shouldn't do that because next she'll want a microwave and then a convection oven. Then she'll want a full-sized refrigerator, a sink with hot and cold water, a dishwasher, and a complete set of expensive china. This will exhaust the budget of our department. Well, I mean, again, we're asked for a simple purchase of a coffee maker for the office. But if we do that, then that might lead to needing a microwave, and then a convection oven, then a refrigerator, a dishwasher, sink, all of these expensive china, all these other things. Before long, our whole budget is shot. But there's no reason to believe even the first link in that chain. Just because somebody wants a coffee maker in the office doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily want a microwave or an oven or anything else. It doesn't have to kit the whole thing out as a kitchen. All they're asking for is a simple coffee maker. Okay, so that is the slippery slope fallacy being put into play. Now, in your book, on page 208, we have exercise 12-1, and it gives you a chance to play with some of these and see if you can tell the difference between what's a fallacy and what is a legitimate example of the slippery slope. So number 1, it says the environmentalists' real thrust is not clean air or clean water or parks or wildlife, but the form of government under which America will live. Look what happened to Germany in the 1930s. The dignity of man was subordinated to the powers of Nazism. The dignity of man was subordinated to Russia. Those are the forces that this thing can evolve into. So we start off in this slippery slope with the environmentalists looking for clean air, clean water, clean parks. But the argument is that this isn't what they're really after, right? So if we give in to them on this, then before long we're going to have this subordinated system of Nazism or communism or something. So the chain here doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. And so you have a slippery slope fallacy. If we look at number 2, it is very frustrating when our manufacturers fail to win a share of a foreign market. And when that happens, we are tempted to respond by imposing tariffs on goods from the countries where we failed to achieve a decent market share, in an effort to force the other country to open their markets to our goods. In extreme cases, perhaps such punitive tariffs are necessary, but they should be used very rarely and avoided if at all possible. For what happens if we can't sell our paint to Tangistan, and so decide to slap a punitive tariff on radios imported from Tangistan? That makes the radio manufacturers in Tangistan angry, and they pressure their government and respond with a punitive tariff. And so Tangistan places high tariffs on all the cameras we export to that country, and then our camera manufacturers will get angry, and they call for high tariffs against all fruits and vegetables imported from Tangistan, as soon as you have the makings of an all-out trade war between the two countries, with all the problems for both manufacturers and consumers that such a trade war causes. Well, here we have what is clearly a legitimate example of the slippery slope. This is simply describing the way that economics works in the guise of a trade war. And so one link will lead to another, and the end result could be just what is described here. So in that case, you have an example of a legitimate slippery slope. So I'm going to let you guys do 3 through 10 here on page 208, and all you really have to do is say whether the slippery slope is a fallacy or whether it is a legitimate example. Okay. So that's the slippery slope. So we'll move on now to our second concept in this chapter, and that is the dilemma, or the fallacy being the false dilemma. So the second argument that's discussed in this chapter is called the dilemma. And a dilemma will present somebody with a limited set of choices, 2 options. If these 2 options are the only options, then the dilemma is legitimate rather. So if you think back to when we were looking at the logic aspect of things, I said we have the concept of A or B. Those are the only 2 options available. It's either A or it's B. If it's not A, you have no other choice but it to be B. Okay? The window is open or the window is closed. Those are the only 2 options you have. So if that window There we go. So you've got two options. The window is either open or it's closed. If that window is open, then it can't be closed. If it's closed, then it can't be open. All right? That's a legitimate example of a dilemma. But there are other unstated options sometimes, and when that happens, then you have a fallacy. The dilemma is usually something that's employed in this fallacious manner in order to force somebody into siding with the presenter. Let's take a look at the example that is presented here. Oh, I should give you the definition that's presented up here as well. False dilemma: to present two alternatives as if they were the only option when there are actually others. One option is bad, so we feel forced to accept the other. So here's the example. Either you let me attend the Dixie Chicks concert, or I will be miserable for the rest of my life. You don't want that, so obviously you will let me go. So basically, what the child in this case is doing is trying to blackmail the parents or make them feel guilty into letting them go to this concert. And it's presenting it as if there's only two options. You're either going to let me go to this concert, or else I'm going to be miserable forever. But the fact is, there are other options available. You could not go to the concert, and yeah, you'd feel down that night, but maybe the next day something wonderful happens and, everything is fine again. There's always that possibility. Perhaps you could go to the Dixie Chicks concert and still be miserable. I mean, I know I would be if I had to sit through that. But in any event, that's the point. There are other options available, but this person is not letting you know that those options are available because they want to force you to side with them. Either I'm going to go to this concert or I'm going to be miserable. Since you don't want me to be miserable, you're going to let me go. That's a false dilemma. That's the fallacy. Okay? Here's another one. Either you use UltraGuard deodorant or you risk the chance of perspiration odor. Surely you don't want to risk the chance of perspiration odor, therefore you will want to use UltraGuard deodorant. So in a commercial, for example, you might see for this UltraGuard, you've got one choice, one option. You can either use UltraGuard or you're going to stink. You don't want to stink, so you have to use UltraGuard. But it's leaving out the fact that there are a lot of other options that are available. There is soap and water. There is a huge shelf full of options of deodorants that a person could choose other than UltraGuard. But they don't want you to think about those other things, so they're presenting it as a false dilemma. So that's the issue. If we use it to where there really are only two choices, then it's legitimate. If not, then it's a fallacy. Let's take a look at page 217, exercise 12-3, and we have some problems here where we, again, are given these dilemmas and we have to decide whether or not these are legitimate examples or fallacious examples. First, new Sweet Lips sweetener has been proved safe. We have carried out very extensive tests on many species of laboratory animals, as well as long-term tests on volunteers who have been using Sweet Lips in food and in beverages, and we have shown conclusively that Sweet Lips is not carcinogenic, so you and your family can be safe and sweet with Sweet Lips. All right, so in this little commercial here, they are indicating that you basically have two options presented to you. You can use Sweet Lips sweetener, or you can use another brand. But that other brand, they're saying we are not carcinogenic. That implies perhaps that the other is. But what if it isn't? What if there are other products out there on the market, other sweeteners that are not carcinogenic? Then wouldn't that present a false dilemma? Isn't it also the case that in addition to using Sweet Lips sweetener or any of the other artificial sweeteners, you could choose also to use just plain sugar, or perhaps honey, or perhaps no sweetener at all? There are other options available to you, which makes this a false dilemma. Look at number 2. Jesus of Nazareth was either a lunatic or he was truly God. After all, anyone who goes around claiming that he is God, as the New Testament shows that Jesus did, must be either batty or telling the truth. Now certainly Jesus was no lunatic. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is clearly not the ravings of a lunatic, so it follows that Jesus must indeed be God. Again, we're presented with a dilemma here. Jesus was either a lunatic or he was God. But are those really the only two options? Does he have to be either crazy or God? Couldn't he also have been a very wise rabbi? Couldn't he have been someone who was human but had divine inspiration or divine calling? There are other possibilities. So once again, we have a false dilemma being presented. So for the homework, I would like you guys to do 3 through 10, which is on page 218. And again, all you have to do is say, is it a fallacy or is it a genuine example of dilemma? Okay. The final argument, I'm going to try to sneak this in because it's not a big one, is called the golden mean. And the golden mean is to claim that the middle ground between the two extremes is the correct position. This one is always, under every circumstance, a fallacy. So to claim that the middle ground between two extremes is the correct position, that is always a fallacy. It is not down to whether it is the middle ground between to say whether it's right or not. And just because something is the middle position does not make it the right position. So the golden mean is always a fallacy. Let's look at the example here. One side wants to allow 18-year-olds to drink any type of alcoholic beverage whatsoever. The other side says that they should not be allowed to drink any at all. So the correct position is to allow them beer, but not hard liquor. Well, the fact is that necessarily the right position? No. Maybe the right position would be to allow 18-year-olds to drink any alcohol they choose. I mean, after all, they have the right to go off and fight and die for their country. In war, don't they have the right then to have a drink afterwards? On the other hand, maybe the right position is to ban all alcoholic beverages altogether for these individuals. The position, just because it's the middle ground between the two, doesn't necessarily mean that it is right. Okay? The golden mean you don't see very often. I'm not going to make a big deal out of it. I'm not going to give you homework associated with it. But that basically is the way that it works. And with about 45 seconds left to go on this recording, I am going to say once again, if you have questions, email me. But otherwise, have a great day, and we'll see you back here with the next video.